Hi, Gregg Perry, another episode of What Makes This Object Great, the historic preservationist. Um, we have a chinoiserie clock here around 1840. Um, a lot of people that are semi-familiar with it say, wow, maybe I've never seen a blue one or not. Um, when I purchased this clock, it was black. So remember, at the conservation studio here, we do two things. We do exterior finishes, such as chinoiserie, marquetry, gilding, restoration, conservation, and we do dials, we do the clock mechanisms. So what drew me to this clock was the amount and the variedness of the decoration. Could barely see it because this clock was totally black. I couldn't see any gold. I could see gold subsurface through the black. As we said, after a couple hundred years, the Urushi lacquer on top of the gilding and the ornamentation, the colored ornamentation, turns black. So um, I could see some places where the Urushi lacquer had chipped off, and I saw blue, 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 and there was a ton of blue. There was a ton of blue cases back in the period. A lot of scarlet, a lot of scarlet, a deep blood red, the blue like this, some turquoise, blacks, tortoise black and red, and I have a couple other blue ones, but nothing this beautiful. I mean, I find it absolutely gorgeous. You have kind of a salmon color in here, and then some browns, other than the golds. You have a lot of things going on here, and you have a minimal amount of raising here, not a lot of raising. A lot of this is, again, painted with one or two bristles or with a quill pen, dipping into, gold style paint, gold dust sometimes mixed with Urushi lacquer. But when I saw this clock and I saw it was coming up, what drew me to this clock, and we really don't have to see it, and on the dial, it's Spitalfields. So the dial has yet to be restored, nor has the mechanism. So that's coming up. But what drew me to this was Mortley of Spitalfields. So where's Spitalfields? Spitalfields is one of my favorite places when I go back to London. Been there several times. It's one of the only, it's in the east side of London, one of the only places you can find a number of 18th century dwellings. They're basically, we would call them row houses today. Maybe we'd call them condos. I don't know. But they were row houses. And there's several blocks. There's about 4 blocks left. And it's been encroached in the last 425 years by skyscrapers. And the modern age is trying to buy those buildings and knock them down. So many, many years ago, like 35 years ago, when I was over there, um, and even before that, there was a man that I met named Dan Crankshaw, and Dan Crankshaw is he's a European historian, but he's basically a British historian, and Dan's about 15 years older than I am, and somewhere in the late 60s, in the era of hippies, long hair, pot, and everything. Somebody like Dan and some of his friends that he hung out with, he was a history major in college. They found this. They found this area. I'm holding on to the bonnet or the hood here, so I got the door open. It wants to leave her down. But so they found this area, and they could see that it was being encroached upon. Original homes dating back, some 400 years. And who lived there? The French Huguenots lived there. Huguenots, depending on who's speaking. If you're French, you're not French. So it was a very transitional area, very Jewish area, Hungarian area. You had Poles there. You had the French there at different times, utilizing these dwellings, and they were homes, probably only around 18, 20-foot facade. Nice big thick door. You walk in, but they're basically 4 stories high, utilizing the attic. So back in the 18th century, early 18th century, they're utilizing the attic for weaving. So this was a textile community by the French Huguenots, where were kicked out of France, or they left because they feared for their lives during the Edict of Nantes. So they left. England said, hey, you guys are wonderful weavers and you can make fabric. Come on over here. and these buildings were available, and they went in the early 18th century, and they probably put people out just to buy them. So they lived in the building. Usually the third and fourth floor was where the machinery or the looms were, and that's where all the work occurred. So it's one of the few places left in London. I mean, talk about history, but you still have Westminster Abbey, you still have great cathedrals and graveyards, but for the most part, the dwellings are gone. I mean, it's just like Philadelphia. What's left in Philadelphia? Virtually nothing of historic note. Just a few fragments is all we have, and it's the same in London. You get commercialism, and they just want to tear everything down and put something new up. So anyway, so Greg Shaw comes by with some of his buddies, historic buddies, and they want to tear these buildings down. And they want to buy them. They want to buy them and start fixing these block by block by block. They want to start fixing them up. So he had, I guess, 7, 8, 9, 10 of his buddies, and it's my understanding they were squatters. They squatted in these buildings. They were actually tearing some of the tops of the buildings down, and they were living on the floors with no electricity, no water. They just went in and squatted, and they squatted in like the housing authority in London, and they filed lawsuits against the city, and they were armed with the historic entities in London that would back them up. So this went on for 4 or 5 years, and obviously, if these people are living in all these buildings, one guy living in each of 10 buildings, then the demolition crew is not tearing them down. They don't want to kill anybody. So in the end, they won and they saved this area. So good for them. So if you want a good read, look up Spitalfields. It's probably a 600-700 page book by Dan Crenshaw. So anyway, they had 4 great horologists throughout the 18th century, and this guy was one of them. Worthy was one of the great horologists, making watches and clocks. First time I've seen one, and it's one of those things, you got to have it, right? So it says it's engraved Spitalfields. It's a solid brass dial. And anyway, and it comes with this beautiful chinoiserie case, a nice ocular here. Remember, the ocular was something that was an option generally if you wanted to buy the case. You bought the movement from somebody. Basically, you would go to an interior designer in that neighborhood in Spitalfields, and the interior designer would say, okay, here's the dial maker. We walk down the street further. Here's the movement. What kind of movement? Do you want a bell? Do you want a quarter striking movement? What kind of a case do you want? Do you want the traditional walnut? We're in the walnut era, the early 1700s. Do you want walnut? Oh no, I want that Chinese influence that's on there. So that's what makes this a very unique one. So I've never seen a Spitalfields clock with the chinoiserie. So, and again, when I got this, it was totally black, and it evolved in mechanically cutting back the finish and chemically using enzymes, mechanics, and any way we could, because some places it did not want to come off. We had loss of about 17% over the entire case and the bonnet, pieces that some of the gilding came off, and all that had to be replicated. But where it came off, you go under magnification, or you go under the infrared light, and you can see an outline where there was a little tiny minuscule crater there, and you can easily recreate that. So, and after you've done X amount of these, and I think that we've restored about 22 of these, so you start to get the feel of the kind of motifs and what they were doing in the time for the ornamentation and the decoration. So, but you would have never thought that it would have been a blue clock, but only because there were spots of loss of the urushi lacquer throughout the case. And a lot of these, typically, they're painted red inside, whether it was a scarlet case on the outside. I don't know what that's about, but that's just the way it was. And heavily chopped out for these hinges. They had a door maybe thicker than they thought it was going to be, because you had options on these. You could have had an overlay door, not a door that had this bead running around the perimeter with the ocular. So you could have had a totally different door on this clock. So, and your choice of hinges, hardware, it's everything was an option back then, building a tall case clock through an interior designer. So I think we're going to end that today. We'll bridge and broach this subject later on with more of our chinoiserie clock collection that we restore and conserve right here. And it's a stunner. So I mean, boy, to put a single uh, single light on this in the evening and just shining, oh, it's absolutely drop dead gorgeous, and all the gold just shimmers. Imagine you're in the 18th century and you have a few candles in the room. It's dead dark, nighttime, and this guy is just sending a message to you. So, Gregg Perry, thanks all for listening and stopping by today.